Oh, here we go. Good evening, everybody. Tonight's lesson on Parshas Vayishlach is stay focused. The best way to win is not to engage. It's a very interesting and important lesson in terms of our service of Hashem and in many other areas as well, interpersonal areas. So in this week's Parsha we have the story of the encounter between Yaakov and his brother Esav. Yaakov, we know, went to Haran when he got married. He sired 12 tribes, and they're on their way back to Israel, to his homeland, to his father. And what happens on the way? He knows that he's going to encounter his brother Esav. His brother Esav wasn't so thrilled about what he had done to him many years prior. So Yaakov prepares a whole procession to go and meet him, greet him, show him honor, explain to him that all the blessings that Esav thought that he was going to have instead of him really didn't come to fruition. So this is what happens. And the parsha starts by telling us that he sends angels, he sends actual malachim to go and encounter Esav. And then we have this grand encounter after this whole preparation that goes about, that happens over here in a span of, 20, 30 verses, describing all the different gifts that he sent to Esav and all the instructions he gave to his children about what's going to happen in case Esav does this, in case Esav does that. The whole plan, and a whole plan how to defend his family, that even if you were to attack one portion, at least another two portions will be able to get away. Okay. So, miraculously, Esav comes and gives him a big hug and a kiss. What that all meant is there's a lot of discussion, because the word Vayishakeu, and he gave him a kiss, there's a bunch of dots on the top, which tells us that there was something different about this type of kiss than any other kiss. There was something different. And there's a lot of commentary on this. Without getting into the details, the Rebbe has a lot of talks about this specific Rashi, where he explains what Vayishakeu means, that he gave him this kiss. And anyway, so what happens afterwards, Esav invites Yaakov and he says, why don't you come with me? Come with me. Come. It reminds me of the story with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was once challenged about his public teaching of Torah during the time of the Roman persecution. And he gave the analogy of a fox that's walking on the riverbank, and it sees the fish running back and forth, dashing back and forth, and he says, "What are you running away from?" So they say, "We're running away from the nets of the fishermen." So the fox says, "You're running away from the nets of the fishermen. I have some advice for you, my friend. Why don't you come here on dry land and live with me? Live with me," says the fox. So in a similar way, Esav is telling Yaakov, why don't you come, we'll spend time together, we'll hang out. This is obviously not going to work. So what does Yaakov tell him? So in text, one day I travel at my own pace. Thank you very much, I appreciate it, but I think we're going to have to part ways. He says it nicely, very diplomatic. He says, I have a lot of cattle, I have a lot of children. It's going to take me a long time to get to you. Ani yisna l'iti, I'm going to go at my own pace. There's an interesting commentary, by the way, which is not quoted here in the lesson, from one of the medieval teachers. His name was Rabbeinu Ephraim. Rabbi Ephraim, that was his name. And he says something interesting about the word li'iti. Li'iti means at my own pace. He says, li'iti, if you count up the letters, what's the numerical value of li'iti? The numerical value of li'iti is 50. 50. You also have 4 letters that make up the word. Plus, sometimes when it comes to gematria, we'll count the entire word as 1. So you end up with the number 55. In a year, you have 52 Shabboses. 52 Shabboses. And 3 Regalim, 3 Sukkos and Pesach and Shavuos, which originally was primarily one day of Yom Tiv. Obviously, according to the Torah later, we're talking about prior to Matan Torah here, but after Matan Torah, you have the first day of Yom Tov, the end of the last day of Yom Tov. But whatever, for the purpose of the gematria, I think it's a cute gematria nonetheless to throw in, where he says because of the li'iti, because of the 55, I'm not going to be able to accompany you. What's the 55? I rest on Shabbos. I rest on Yom Tov, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot. I rest. I don't do work. I'm not going to be able to travel with you. So we're not going to get there at the same time. Why don't you just go ahead? Ani Yisna, Lali'iti, I'm going to go at my own pace. This is an allusion to Shabbos and Yom Tov. Okay. But Rashi tells us something interesting here. Rashi takes a little bit of a different route. It says as follows in text 1b, until I come to my master, to Seir. He told him of a longer journey, although he intended to go only as far as Sukkot. It's the name of a place. He said to himself, if he intends to harm me, he will wait until I come. But he did not go to Seir. When will he go? Says Rashi, in the days of Mashiach. As the verse states, and Savior shall ascend Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esav. There are also many midrashic interpretations to this section. Rashi concludes and tells us this isn't the only interpretation. There are many other midrashim. So Yaakov had no intention of actually coming to visit and showing up at Esav's doorstep, at Esav's door, just like that. He had no intention of doing that. And according to Rashi, it's only going to be in the time to come. When Mashiach comes, when the redemption will come, that's when Yaakov will actually be there. And the question is, first of all, it's obvious that Esav, if he wanted to do him harm, he would come after him. So, he could come after him anywhere. You're not coming to me? Okay, I'll chase you down. Like, you know what I mean? You're going to be in Israel. You're going to be around here. So why are you telling him? Why are you telling him I'm not going to come to you? Basically saying I'm not coming to you. He'll find you anyway. Number one. Number two. Why was it okay for Yaakov over here to be untruthful to his brother? It seems like Yaakov is not telling the truth. He tells his brother, "Yeah, I'm coming, but I'm coming at my own pace." And even if we say that it was, for some reason, it was mutter, it was acceptable to be untruthful because he was concerned about his safety and security, but at the end of the day, it's not clear that his telling his brother this would actually guarantee his security. Now, the Abarbanel, who's one of the other commentaries, is bothered by a little bit of a different issue with Yaakov's truthfulness. He's bothered by the same issue of Yaakov's truthfulness. And here's what he says in text number 2. To distance Yaakov from empty words and deception, it seems appropriate to explain the verse in an unconventional manner. In other words, he's saying, if we just read it face value, we take it at face value, it seems like Yaakov is not telling the truth. So therefore, we're going to interpret it in an unconventional manner. Yaakov says, until I come to my master. And what he means is, until I come to my master Isaac, not Esav. I mean, coming to my father. In other words, you can interpret the word Adoni, my master, not necessarily referring to Esav. It could be referring to his father Yitzchak. It's not too far-fetched to use the same term master for both his brother Esav and his father Yitzchak in the same sentence. For the honor due to an older brother is part and parcel of the honor due to one's father. Indeed, our sages draw the directive to honor an older brother from the mitzvah of honoring one's father. In this reading, Yaakov did not tell Esav that he would meet him and that he would go to Seir. Rather, that he would go to his father, Yitzchak, as he indeed did. So according to the Abarbanel, what Yaakov was actually saying was, I'm going to end up, I'm going to meet up with Daddy. I'm not going to be seeing you. I'm going to go to Adoni. So now the obvious question is, if this were a plausible interpretation, why did Rashi insist on interpreting the words in a way where Yaakov comes out as being the one who's untruthful? If Abarbanel is correct, why did Rashi disagree? In other words, what's Rashi trying to tell us? How do we understand the richness of what Rashi is trying to communicate is by contrasting what Rashi says against the backdrop of the other commentaries. So if the Abarbanel comes along with a plausible interpretation, which is that he means he's going to be going to his father, then what did Rashi mean? Why is Rashi saying what he's saying? another question. Why does Rashi even quote this whole section about how ultimately Yaakov will meet up with Esav in the time to come? Why is that relevant? Who cares? There's something he's saying here. There's something that Rashi is trying to communicate by telling us that Yaakov is saying, you know what? Not now. Now I'm going at my own pace, but ultimately at the end of time I'm going to be there. And finally, what is Rashi trying to communicate with the final line of his interpretation, which teaches that there are many midrashic interpretations for this statement that he made to Esav? Why is it necessary to even tell me that? Many midrashim, who cares? Now, like all stories in the Torah, this story contains timeless messages for all of us, for each and every one of us. As the famous statement of Chazal, which we're going to take a little bit more of a look at a little later, Ma'aseh Avos Siman Labanim. Ma'aseh Avos Siman Labanim means the actions, the deeds of our forefathers is a siman, is a sign for the children. So it both provides us with a paradigm, with a model of behavior, and then also, as the Ramban explains, Nachmanides explains, every action taken by our forefathers served in a spiritual role, in a spiritual capacity, to lay the groundwork for some later occurrence in the Jewish people's lifetime. During something that happened in the span of Jewish history. There's something that takes place in the span of Jewish history that somehow reflects one of the actions, one of the deeds taken by our forefathers. Somewhere. So there's a commentary, which is also from the medieval times. In text number 3, he understands this to mean a little bit differently, a little bit different than Barber. Now let's see how maybe he could contribute a little bit to our understanding of Rashi. So now let my master go ahead before a servant, right? That was what Yaakov said to Esav. Now let my master go ahead before a servant. I'm going to be going at my own pace, right? The Medrash reads these words as a division of worlds. Yaakov tells Esav to take the first portion, this world, where Yaakov lags behind, suffering in exile. Whereas later he will come to my master to Seir. The last letters of these words in Hebrew spell the name of Eliyahu or Elijah. The 4 words that he uses here in the verse, Avoi, the end of that word is an Aleph. That's the first letter of the word Eliyahu. The second word is El, Avoi El, I will come to. The last letter of the word El is Lamed, and that's the second letter of Eliyahu. Adoni, the final letter of this word Adoni, my master, is a Yud. That's the Yud of the Eliyahu. And then finally, Seira, its final letter is a Hey, which is the final letter of the name Elia. And the reason why these letters appear specifically, this allusion appears at the end of the letters, at the end of the words. In other words, Avoi, the last letter is Aleph, El, the last letter is Lamed, Adoni, the last letter is Yud, Seira, the last letter is Hey. Why the last letter? Because it's an allusion to times that will come in the future. It's only in the future when Eliyahu will come. Oh, that's when I will meet you up in Seira. So based on this, we could possibly understand. Go ahead.
So the portion is what Yaakov gave him when he asked him for it?
Well, according to the Panei Raza, what he means here is that Yaakov was saying, I'm going to go at my own pace, meaning I'm going to let you take this world. I'm going to take the next world.
But on what basis do we say that?
It's an allusion in the text. In other words, it's a medrash. The medrash understands this verse as Yaakov saying, Esav, we're not really compatible in this world. Let's split. You take this world, I'll take the next. Now, what does that mean exactly? We need to have a better grasp of the concept. How do you just relinquish, abdicate your, what do you mean? Yaakov doesn't deserve this world, only the next? What's the deal here? Perhaps based on what we learned, we could understand what Rashi was saying. Again, what did Rashi say? Rashi said, That the meaning here is Yaakov saying, I'm going to go at my own pace. Why don't you go ahead? When am I going to meet you? In the times of Mashiach. It seems like he's alluding to this teaching of the Medrash that's quoted by the Panei Achraza, that only in the time of Eliyahu Hanavi, when Elijah the prophet will come to announce the redemption, that's when Yaakov will inherit Seir in the next world. But why would Yaakov do that? Why would Yaakov just relinquish his rights to this world until Mashiach comes? To his brother, to Esav? That seems like a posture of weakness, of despair, of hopelessness. Esav, I can't really contend with you in this world. Why don't you just go and take it? Why don't you have it? So, in order to answer these questions, let's turn to another, perhaps more broader understanding of what's going on here, of the exchange over here between Yaakov and Esav, a broader understanding that has some halachic implications. Very interesting. In text number 4, this is from the Shulchan Aruch, from the Code of Jewish Law. If one who worships idols asks a Jew where he is going, if the Jew only needed to travel a single parsa, which is approximately 3.8 kilometers, he ought to respond that he is traveling 2 parsas. What's the meaning here? The guy is asking you, are you going? You're traveling? Let's go together. So the Yid says, I'm going a lot further than you think I'm going. I'm going a lot further than you think I'm going. Now, this obviously was established at a time when Gentiles were many of them were idolaters, and in those days it was very dangerous to get a ride, or to take a ride, or to pick up as a tramp, to pick up a non-Jewish idolater. It was it was a matter of security and safety. And so the Shulchan Aruch tells us all kinds of different things that we need to do in order to assure our safety. One of them is not taking going for a ride. Don't pick them up and take them to where they have to go. Let them find their own ride. Why? Because we're concerned for our life. I see Alan is shaking his head. You completely agree.
But you're talking about Esav like a goy?
We'll get back to Esav in a second. But yes. So now, in today's day and age, many claim that this law is not that relevant because in today's day and age, people's natures have changed, or people's tendencies have changed. But I tend to agree with Alan that that's not necessarily the case. Now, it's true there are certain social norms today that serve to inhibit or impede, to some degree, this nature. But there are definitely countries in the world where they don't have those social norms. If you were to flag down a yellow cab, all right, I think most people will feel decent, basic safety. I think people will feel, especially with a cell phone in their hand, they're not going to feel unsafe. They're not concerned that the yellow cab driver is necessarily going to pull out a gun on them. It's not a very common occurrence. There's a license. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of impeding elements here that kind of counterbalance the concern. Just like a doctor. Why would you go to a doctor? Maybe the doctor will abuse the patient, because in general there's a halachic principle that a professional is not going to abuse his status as a professional lest he lose his reputation of being a professional. So, in a similar way, today it might apply to a lesser degree. There is a famous shita, a very famous, I should say, in the world of halachic discussion and debate. There's a famous shita, a very famous opinion of the Meiri, Rabbi Menachem Meiri, who was one of the medieval scholars, who wrote an incredible commentary on the Shas. And in his opinion, and he writes this in multiple places, this is not the same anymore. People, Jews and Gentiles, we can trust each other in terms of our safety, etc. He doesn't agree with this approach. The Rebbe, in one of his comments on the bottom of the Likutei Sichos, one of his notes, like his references in the Likutei Sichos, where he deals with this issue, he quotes the Meiri, but clearly he's of the opinion that there are certain things. But once those impediments are removed, so the nature springs back into the way it was before. So that's the way we're going to assume tonight, just for our discussion's sake, that's the case. Okay. Now, why is this relevant today? Is there any way it's relevant today? Is there any area where this is relevant today? Assuming that it's not practiced today as it was in the olden days, is there an area of our lives as Jews where this is relevant to some degree? So let's get back to Esav now. Esav doesn't just mean a physical brother to Yaakov Avinu. Esav represents a spiritual. He's the prototype of a spiritual foe. In fact, in this week's parsha, we have the whole story with Yaakov meeting up with the angel, meaning the spiritual, force that stands behind Esav. He meets up with him, and they wrestle with each other. And he actually causes damage. He causes physical injury to Yaakov. That's where the whole law of the Gid HaNoshe is concerned. It flows from, results from. This whole idea of the sciatic nerve that we're not allowed to eat. For which reason we don't eat the whole hind of the animal. The whole hind of the animal is sold to goyim, because we don't know today already. We don't know where exactly how to take it out. It's a real skill to be able to pull out the sciatic nerve together with all the surrounding areas so that it doesn't. We don't end up with some of it. It's a serious prohibition of the Torah, Gid HaNoshe. That all comes from what happened in this week's parsha. But anyway, getting back to our discussion here, Esav represents a spiritual foe. And that would mean in our lifetime, in our lives, that would mean our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, and also, importantly, the subtle societal pressures to adopt a more Gentile lifestyle. This is represented by Esav. And the messaging that Esav gives us is that Judaism is demanding, it's overwhelming, it's difficult, it's not worth our effort, it's not worth our time. You're anyway going to be a hypocrite because you know exactly what you really are. We talked about this in the other course a couple of weeks ago, course from Sunday night. A person might feel inauthentic. I'm a hypocrite because sometimes I want this, sometimes I want the other thing. How do I reconcile between the two? And so with regard to all of this, we're told that when Esav comes to talk to us, what do we say? I'm traveling a lot further than where you think I'm traveling. I'm going somewhere else. I'm just headed somewhere else. I'm not going to fight with you directly. I'm just simply heading out to a different direction. I'm just going a lot further. And this is the metaphor that we can learn into, we can read into the statement of the Shulchan Aruch, that when the Gentile asks you where you're going, you tell him 2 parsas. If you're really going 1 parsa, you just tell him I'm going somewhere else. There's a story that they tell over from a fellow who had some family relation with us, talking about in my grandmother's generation. His name was Rabbi Yisrael Nevler. Yisrael Nevler, his mother and my grandmother were grandchildren of the same grandmother. The grandmother was married twice. The first husband passed away. So this Yid, Rabbi Yisrael Nevler, was a very intelligent guy. He was a very intense chassid, very shrewd. He understood people. So anyway, bottom line is, Rabbi Yisrael Nevler, who was a teacher of students in the yeshiva, he used to use the following analogy. It was one time during the First World War. Remember the First World War? Were you alive then? No, also not. Okay, I wasn't. So that makes 2 of us. So during the First World War, there's a Russian Cossack soldier who rides his horse, who races his horse through the enemy camp. And he causes a tremendous amount of havoc and damage and destruction. And he manages to ride back to his headquarters, and they give him a whole medal. They honor him. Give him the medal. They give him the whole 9 yards. So then there was another Cossack soldier who figured, maybe I'll do the same thing. I'll take my horse, and I'll run into the enemy lines. I'll cause damage, and I'll come back, and I'll also get honors. So he does the same thing. Takes his horse, runs in, But this time it didn't exactly work out the same way. He actually got caught. They stopped. They killed the horse. He barely made it out alive. Okay. He comes back to the camp and he's not given any honors. He's actually reprimanded. So you have to ask yourself, what's the difference between these two? What's the difference between this soldier and that soldier? This one is honored. This one's reprimanded. So they asked the soldier, the first soldier that ran into the camp and caused a tremendous amount of damage, that was honored. They asked him, what did you do exactly? She says, I'll tell you the truth. This wasn't even an intentional thing. It happens to be that in those days, when you were a soldier and you walked into a town, so all the townspeople were forced to provide you with whatever you wanted. So I banged down the door of some Jewish home, and I see that the woman of the house is making a cholent, make some kind of stew, and it's on the fire. So I said, give me that cholent, I'm hungry. I took it. I don't know if he took it in the pot. It seems like from the story that he took it in the pot. I put it on the back of the horse, and it's boiling hot, burning hot. Put it on the back of the horse, and boy did that horse run. So I wasn't hitting the horse. I wasn't beating the horse to go. I wasn't trying to get it. The horse, we had incredible horsepower. And so that's how I managed. You know, this is just, I was running home and I went through this enemy camp. But it wasn't because I intended to do it. I didn't intend to have this incredible horsepower. Just the horse was so intent on getting out of the situation that I was in. You know, the boy, can you imagine? that I managed to have all this incredible energy and this incredible victory. So what does this teach us? This is all a metaphor. Maybe it was a true story. Maybe it was a made-up story. It doesn't make a difference. Maybe it's a fairy tale. The point is not the origin of the story. The point is like this: that sometimes when it comes to winning a battle, taking the direct route is not necessarily the right way. Confronting the enemy head-on isn't necessarily going to get you anywhere. Sometimes a different tactic, a different strategy is necessary. The one that Yaakov tells us about. The one that Yaakov tells us about is, I'm going 2 parsois far away. I'm going 2 parsois far away. I'm going a lot further than you think I'm going. I'm going at my own pace. In other words, he's doing something where I'm not confronting the enemy head on. I'm not confronting Esav. I'm just going my own way. I'm going my own way. I'm doing my own thing. I'm focused on what I have to be focused on. Let's take a look at some of this. Text number 5. This is an interesting letter from the Rebbe to what seems to be a student of the yeshiva who complained that his mind was occupied by all kinds of foreign thoughts, all kinds of unproductive thoughts. So here's what he says in text number 5 here. Greetings and blessings. In response to your letter in which you write about disturbing thoughts, you should divert your focus from them entirely and have words of Torah readily available in your mind. Certainly you know chapters from Tanya and other Hasidic discourses by heart. The quip of my esteemed father-in-law, the Rebbe of blessed memory, is well known, that things crawl into an empty space. Naturally, if one's brain is full of words of Torah and prayer, and they are even recorded to memory, they remain seared in the mind even when one is not actively thinking about them. Indeed, if the mind is not empty, fewer things crawl inside, and even if it does sometimes happen, it is easier to banish them. With blessings and success for the study of Torah and the fear of heaven. So the Cossack from the story would recognize the Rebbe's advice. Because instead of dealing with them head on, instead of wrestling with a thought, have you ever tried to wrestle with a thought? There's a thought that's bothering you, a thought that comes to you and it's like, you don't want this thought on your mind because you don't want to contemplate this. It's not something that you don't want to feel the energy that comes with this thought. So you can wrestle with it. You can say, you know what I mean? Like try to shut it down by quieting the voice. Doesn't work. To quiet the voice of the thought, you're doomed to failure. It will only return with greater vengeance. Vengeance mentioned this on other occasions. I have a book at home called White Bears, and I forget the rest of the title. White Bears. It's all about controlling thought. It's written by a psychologist. And if anybody said to you, don't think about a white bear. Don't think about the white bear. You're going to be able to stop yourself from thinking about the white bear? You will be?
Well, if they say don't, usually you do.
There you go.
You do the opposite.
You do exact opposite. You're not going to be able to stop thinking about the white bear unless you think about something else. And you think about something else, not in response, not in terms of something that, I can't think about the white bear, so I'm going to force myself to think about something else. You just think about something else. You just simply move on. Ani isnaha lo li'iti. I'm going at my own pace. You just simply move on. You don't contend with the enemy head on. You do your thing. You do your thing. You focus on the positive without any conflict or tension that results from the two being in such close proximity, or the replacement of the thought. You just simply move on. That's the Rebbe's advice here. This is similar to a teaching of the famous Hasidic master. His name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk. They used to call him the Kotzker. The Kotzker meaning the Rebbe of Kotsk. He was a very sharp fellow, and many of his teachings are short, pithy statements. In text number 6, I want my followers to abstain from sin, not because it's forbidden, but because they don't have the spare time. What does that mean? They're always focused on what they have to be focused on. They're not busy struggling and wrestling with the influences and impulses that bother them. Instead, they move above it. The Rebbe Maharash, the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe of Shmuel, used to always say, everybody else claims, or everybody else advises one, that if you can't go straight, direct, because there's some kind of roadblock, some kind of obstacle, geht man runter, so you go under. I say that the Chatchila Ariber means, in the very first place, always go over. Don't try to struggle with the obstacle. Don't even get to the obstacle to make the determination that you need to go under. You see an obstacle, you go over it. And this is something, by the way, that I believe that the teachings of Chassidus help a person do, because what do the teachings of Chassidus help a person understand is they take a person and they lift him up on stilts. Meaning they teach the person what his true potential is. And so a lot of the challenges that would normally be roadblocks are just simply things you could walk over. You don't have to wrestle with it. You don't have to struggle with it. You simply are lifted up. You're walking on stilts. Just walk over it. You walk over the obstacle. You don't deal directly with it. You don't contend directly with it. Recognize it for what it is. It's just an obstacle. It's just there to stop you. Walk over it. In the first place, you walk over it. What's our mission? What's the Kotzker Rebbe saying? I don't want people to abstain from sin because they are concerned that it's a transgression, that they're not allowed to because it's forbidden. He wants them to abstain from sin because they simply don't have time to focus on it. What should one be focused on? One should be focused on their mission. What does God want me to do? This ties into what we talked about last night, even though it was a little hard to concentrate and follow. But nonetheless, the lesson last night made the case that we need to shift our paradigm so that we live a life of the nefesh elikis. The more we live a life of the godly soul, the happier we'll be. The more mission-oriented we are, the happier we'll be. Because it'll be less about me, less about materialism, less about my personal attainments, more about what God wants me to do. That gives me joy and eternal joy. So the bottom line is, we're here to make a dwelling place for God. We're here to make God feel comfortable in this world. and we do this through doing good deeds. And so, if we take this approach, and we have a hot cholent on the back of the horse, we can go even into enemy territory. We can take down the enemy. But what's the key? We always have to be on the move. You have to have that burning cholent. In text number 7, a non-Jew or non-Jewish consciousness, the Rebbe says, can really only affect the Jew when the Jew behaves as if his or her true place is in exile. When that happens, the non-Jew indeed does imagine that the Jew is truly under their dominion. By contrast, when the Jew follows in Yaakov's footsteps and tells Esav of a longer journey, that our current exile existence is only a pit stop on our journey, that we are truly heading to Seir in the times of Mashiach, then the opposite happens. Liberators shall march upon Mount Zion, to wreak judgment on the mountain of Esav, and God will be king, God will be the king. The fact that a Jew is now in exile is merely a preparatory step for the redemption, the road to Mashiach. We are now in the middle of refining the world, of breaking its darkness with the candle of mitzvahs and the light of Torah, preparing it for the future redemption, when even the nations will walk in His unceasing light, and the glory of Hashem will be revealed, and all flesh together will see His mouth speak. So the idea here is that we're not in Golus indefinitely. We are not here just to be here. We're here for a purpose. That purpose, as we mentioned earlier, is to transform the world, to elevate the world so that it be a dwelling place for God, meaning a place where God feels comfortable. And it's easy for us to get distracted with what's going on in Golus. It's easy for us to get distracted with our surroundings, to start believing that this is really our home, this is really where we're supposed to be. But if we focus on the intent, we focus on the mission, then Esav will not be successful at distracting us.
I hate to bring this up, but I've been reading a lot of historical fiction lately about what happened in World War II. I was kind of blissfully ignorant of a lot of it before. And this paragraph doesn't jive with what happened to the Jews in Europe.
Which paragraph?
This paragraph, by contrast, when a Jew follows Jacob's footsteps and tells Esau of a longer journey, that our current exile, the Nazis didn't care what they said.
I need you to explain a little bit more what you said.
This is, I believe, implying that it will be okay for Jews as long as they keep their focus and everything, but they certainly weren't able to do that during the time of the Holocaust.
Okay, but I think that in general, the attitude has to be that we're here temporarily, we're in Golus, and we don't want to get distracted. How do we not get distracted? By being focused on our mission, why we're here. And then Esav ultimately will be able to beat Esav as well. And so the key here is not engaging our enemy in direct combat, but rather focusing on our purpose, where we need to go, where we need to emphasize our efforts. So now what do we gain from all of this? When Yaakov tells Esav that he should go first, he should take this world, it doesn't mean that Yaakov is abandoning this world, but rather Yaakov is telling him, the way I'm going to inherit this world, the way I'm going to be able to transform this world, make it a place that God wants to dwell in, is by letting you go first, by not struggling with you, by not wrestling with you head on, by not combating you head on. So when Yaakov says to him, go ahead, I'm gonna go at my own pace, it doesn't mean that Yaakov is abandoning, he's not abdicating his position. Yaakov is simply saying, my formula for going about this struggle is by not dealing with you head on. I'm going to walk at my own pace. That's my way of dealing with. That's my way of handling the challenge here.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah.
So this meant to be not necessarily physical, but more spiritual.
In a spiritual sense, right? Correct. In a physical sense, it's good that you brought that up. The law is in Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, in the laws of Shabbos, we're taught that if we know that Gentiles are arming themselves and intend to approach the border, just intend to approach the border, they haven't even yet approached the border, we have an obligation on Shabbos to violate the Shabbos, to arm ourselves, and go out and attack them. That's our obligation. That's in a physical sense.
But where's the basis? Does it come from the Shulchan Aruch? But where does that?
Where does the Shulchan Aruch get it from? The Shulchan Aruch gets it from earlier medieval halachic rulings, from the Ur Zarua, I believe the Ramah as well, if I'm not mistaken. Where did they get it from?
In the Torah.
They take it from the Talmud. Now, I think it's pretty obvious that the logic behind it seems to be quite sound, right? That if you know your enemy is planning against you, you need to get up and you need to attack them. Hashkim laharga. The Rebbe used to always say, and he said it many times in the context of Israeli actions that were taken outside the state to prevent enemies from attacking us, or calling up the reserves. He would say, calling up the reserves, that's the hashkim, that's the getting up. You're getting up laharga, you're getting up to kill them. By just seeing that we've gotten up, by seeing that we've called up our reserves, that itself prevents that they should be ultimately killed, because they won't attack. But they have to see the strong posture. They have to see that we're strong.
It would be interesting to know the basis in the Torah, like actually. But that's
I could find that for you very easily.
That would be very interesting. Yeah.
Sure, 100%. Now, nothing in the Shulchan Aruch is just out of the hand. It's always sourced. There's always something. There's always a basis for that. Okay. So what Yaakov begins, the way Yaakov dealt with his brother Esav, that's a process that began what we are going to finish, what we are meant to finish. Text number 8. When we learn one Torah concept from another, it indicates that the notion that serves as the teacher, meaning the one that informs the other, is what actually causes and drives the idea that is learned in the second notion. In our case, when a Jew in any generation or at any time is saved from a physical or spiritual idolater asking, "Where are you going?" it is because the inner dimension of such protection was set in motion by our forefather Yaakov. So whenever you have a Gentile, whatever it might be, whether it's a Gentile surroundings or it's a physical Asa, whatever it might be, and he's asking us, "Where are you going? Where are you going? Let me help you get there. I'm going to show you where to go." So the process and the response, the appropriate response to Esav, has already been set in motion by Yaakov. He has taught us already then, and that empowers us today to do what we need to do and follow in his footsteps and do the same thing. As the Ramban writes in text number 9, concerning the sections about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, our sages mentioned the axiom from the Torah, everything that occurred to our forefathers is a sign for the children. So Yaakov wasn't just a private individual with his own mission, but he was a true forefather and a patriarch. And it was his mission that was the first phase in the process that we then continue and we carry on. So Yaakov prepared for our spiritual battles that we were going to have with Esav in the coming hundreds and thousands of years. Now we're prepared, now we're ready to return back, to circle back to the language that Rashi used in his commentary on this verse that we began with tonight. Let's turn back, if you can please indulge me for a moment, let's turn back to text number 1b. And I want to show something to you in the Hebrew. If you take a look in the Hebrew, it's on page 141. So Rashi quotes from the verse, Ad asher avoi el adoni seira. That's a quote from the pasuk, where where the pasuk says, Yaakov says, "Until I arrive to my master in Seir." Then Rashi explains, Hirchiv loy haderech. Hirchiv loy haderech means he broadened the path. He broadened the roadway. He broadened the conduit through which he would be traveling. And the Rebbe points something out very interesting. The word that's used here by Rashi is hirchiv. He broadened. Why doesn't he say he'erich? He'erich means he made the trip much longer, like he should have said. We've been learning all about this for the past 45 minutes. How when we meet a Gentile, what should we tell him? We have a much longer route. We have a much longer route. Why doesn't Rashi use that word? Herich le haderech. He said to him, I have a much longer route to take. Why did he say hirchiv? He made it broader. What's the difference between the two? Small nuance in Rashi. What did Rashi have in mind? What is Rashi alluding to here? So he explains that when you have a broad derech, a broad, mission, your mission encompasses a lot of different things. It's not just a long stretch. It's a very broad one. There's all kinds of elements that it encompasses. It's broad. Very, very broad. And what Yaakov is saying is, I'm focused on my mission. I'm going on my way. I have a very broad mission to accomplish. It's not about the length of the mission. It's about the fact that I have all kinds of different aspects of my existence that I need to take care of. It's a very broad path for me. And I'm going to only end up in Seir on my journey's terms. I have a hirchiv lehaderech. I have a very broad harchava. I have a very broad approach to what I'm doing here in Golus. I'm not here to meet you. I'm not here to hang out with you in the nightclub or whatever it might be. That's not where I'm headed. I have a very broad approach to what I'm doing here. I have to do all kinds of different things on the way. Got to take care of this, I take care of that. Elevate all of these elements within my existence, within the place where I am. So, whenever I'm ready, that's when I'll meet you up in Seir. Which means when I'm done with my shlichus, when I'm done with my mission here. I'm here temporarily. I'm not going to fight you head on. I have a very broad mission. When I'm ready, you can catch up with me. You can catch me if you can. So as far as I'm concerned, my focus is not on when you are going to arrive. My focus is on my mission. Whenever I'm ready, when I'm done, when I've done what I need to do. And that's one of the reasons why Rashi mentions that ultimately Yaakov will get there in the end of time. Do you remember our question earlier? Our question was, why is Rashi even mentioning? Why is it necessary to point out that Yaakov will get there in the end of times? That's not relevant to the interpretation of the words. Rashi interpreted the words, Ani yisna l'li'iti, I'm going to go at my own pace. I have a lot of children, I have a lot of stuff going on, I'm going at my own pace. He could have stopped right there. There was no need for Rashi to continue to say, when will he get to Seir? Only when Mashiach comes. Why does he mention that? Why is Rashi telling us that? Because it's germane to the whole interpretation. It's fundamental to the whole interpretation. Because what Rashi is trying to tell us is this is an illusion for our service of God throughout all the generations. And yes, this is the way we contend with Esav. We're not abdicating our position. We're not just relinquishing our rights to this world. We're saying the way we're going to deal with this world is by telling Esav, we have what to do. We have our mission. We're not going to contend with him directly face on. When will we get to him? We'll get to him in the end of days. That's the way we're going to do it. And this also helps us understand, one final point, it helps us understand the final statement within Rashi, which is there are many midrashim that explain this. You remember that line? Rashi says, there are many midrashim here that explain this. Why is it necessary to tell me? Rashi doesn't always tell me. Rashi is busy all the time basing his interpretation. Every word of Rashi is usually based on a chazal, on some statement from chazal, from the sages of the Talmud, the sages of the Medrash. We call them chazal. Chachamenu zechrenu levracha. That's an acronym for chazal. So Rashi is always basing himself on midrashim. Why is he pointing out here that there are many different midrashim? He says they're very beautifully. In every generation, there's another medrash. What does that mean? The way we have to deal with Esav in each generation is different. It's not always exactly the same. This generation required this approach. This generation requires a little bit of a different approach. In each generation, there's someone to teach us how we need to deal with Esav. What's the right approach to Esav in this generation? There are different medrashim. There are different hoirois, different instructions about how to customize this approach to that generation, to those times, those circumstances. What about in our generation? What's the medrash in our generation? So, the Rebbe taught us that in our generation, it's necessary to study about Mashiach. To study about how things will be when Mashiach comes. What the world will be like. In text number 10, the advice is to learn Torah about Mashiach and redemption, because the power of Torah, which is God's wisdom that transcends the world, is to change our very nature. So even if a person feels that he or she is personally distant from the notion of redemption, since they have not yet left their personal inner exile, they can nevertheless learn the Torah of redemption and rise above his or her own state. We then can begin to live with the idea of redemption, since we know and recognize and feel that Mashiach is coming. So, personal redemption, meaning personal liberation from our own inner exile. We talked about this many times throughout the last number of lessons in the JLI course. We each have our own inner exile. Our divine soul is enmeshed within this body, within this natural soul, and for all intents and purposes is pretty much incarcerated there. It doesn't have freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is one of the founding principles of this country. Freedom of expression. But not for the divine soul. The divine soul doesn't have freedom of expression. It's difficult to find the expression of the divine soul. How do we bring about more expression of the divine soul? By learning more about what the divine soul values, how the divine soul looks at the world. How does the divine soul see the world? It sees the world as a place of godliness. That's what the divine soul sees. As far as it's concerned, that's what the world is meant to be. That's what the world is intended to ultimately will be. And so studying about that part of the Torah helps us experience that. It helps us experience, helps the divine soul express that perspective. And we end up thinking that way, we end up feeling that way, we end up ultimately acting that way. And that helps us avoid the Esav, the influence of the Esav around us. So that's the medrash for this generation. The previous generations, perhaps they had a little bit of a different twist on things. Each generation had its own way of dealing and addressing the Esav. In this generation, this is what the Rebbe taught us. Go ahead.
And what part of the Torah is that teaches us that?
First of all,
It's the same thing Aaron was in.
first and foremost, you have certain areas in the Torah, like for example, the Rambam, Maimonides, he talks about the last 2 chapters of the laws of kings. Last 2 chapters, we actually closed the entire book of the Rambam, are all about the end of times. All about Mashiach. What it's all about. Last two chapters of the Maimonides, that it's available online. If you want to go on Chabad.org, they have an English Rambam there. Hilchos Molachim u'Milchamei Sehem, the laws of kings and their wars. And over there, the last 2 chapters, he talks about the process of Mashiach's coming, and what the purpose of it all is. I'll just mention that the Rambam is very clear that the purpose of all of this is that at the time of Mashiach's coming, there will be the full and complete enactment of the Torah. In other words, the Torah will find full expression. And it'll be a time when we will be able to be absorbed in the study of Torah. That's what our pursuit will be all the time. Studying God's wisdom. That's the time of Mashiach. Studying the infinite wisdom of God as it's embodied in the Torah. So that's first and foremost. You have that they have those 2 chapters of the Rambam. There are many other midrashim as well, but the Rambam himself, in the end of the laws of kings there, in the end of the laws of Mashiach, he tells us that one should not engage in lengthy study of the midrashim that talk about things like Gog and Magog. You heard of Gog and Magog?
Yeah, what is
Gog and Magog. It sounds like a Goggle Muggle, right? You heard of a Goggle Muggle? That's what the cantors take before they have to sing. They take a Goggle Muggle. It's a raw egg with some honey, with some liquor that keeps them very nice and moist for the next hour. Have to try that someday. The one time I did, I didn't really find it to be all that helpful. But anyway, Gog and Magog are supposedly two nations or two forces that struggle with each other at the time of the end of days. And it's mentioned in the prophets. The Midrashim talk a little bit about it. And the Rambam tells you that trying to figure out from these Midrashim what exactly is going to happen is a waste of your time. It's not going to lead you to neither love or awe of God. So he tells you don't bother with it. However, there are many teachings in Chassidus and Kabbalah that talk about the end of days. Talk about what the world will be like when Mashiach will come. Why is it necessary? The answer is super simple. Because the whole goal, the whole trajectory of the teachings of Chassidus and of Kabbalah is to explain to us Achdus Hashem, the unity of God. The unity of God will be achieved in the most tangible way when Mashiach comes. V'hoya Hashem lemelech al kol ha'aretz. God will be the sovereign over the entire universe, entire world. And that day, God's name will be one and He will be one. Meaning the world will no longer be a fragmented place that doesn't experience the divine and instead has all kinds of shards flying all over the place. This one says this and the other one says that. This one's an atheist and this one's agnostic. In the end of days, Hashem will be one, meaning the entire universe will recognize God and will align their lives with the way God wants them to be. So the whole trajectory of Chassidus is to teach that, is to communicate that. So this is really all about Mashiach. It's really all about the end of days. It's really all about what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. They say, and with this I'll just close, they say, what's going to be the difference between one who studied Chassidus and one who didn't study Chassidus when Mashiach comes? The difference will be in the aha. You ever heard of the aha moment? I know JLI promises for every lesson there's an aha moment. It's a promise, I'm not sure they've delivered, but nonetheless, there's an aha moment. When a person studies Chassidus and will, Be'ezras Hashem, God willing, merit the time to come when Mashiach will come and we'll see what we're studying, a person will say, aha, that's what they were talking about. That's what I learned about in Derech Mitzvah at 5:55 a.m. Now I understand. Now I understand it. But the Yid who Nebuch didn't learn in Chassidus will be a Rachmanis on him. They'll be standing there like, I don't get it. I don't know what's coming off. I have no idea what's going on here. That's the difference. The difference is going to be in the aha. So what's the bottom line? We need to learn more Chassidus. We need to learn more Chassidus. And so with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Wishing everybody a good evening. God willing, next week I will be updating you as far as whether or not there will be a class, because next week there's a Yutas Kislev Farbringen, Yutas Kislev, in honor of Yutas Kislev. There's going to be a Farbringen for the Shluchim. The Shluchim get together just like as one family. So all the Shluchim from Bergen County, talking about 25 families or 30 families. So we get together in one of the larger Chabad houses with our families, and we celebrated this Kislev there.
On Monday.
So I will update you as far as whether or not there's going to be a class earlier or later. We'll see. So Bez Hashem will be in touch, and wish everybody a great week and a happy Yutas Kislev. Also want to remind everybody that Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, we have a Yutas Kislev Farbringen here with Rabbi Raskin from Brooklyn Heights. He happens to have been Rabbi Newbort's former employer. And I welcome everybody to join us for that evening. There'll be a dairy buffet and hopefully some entertainment and inspiring words.
Thank you very much.